At the recent 2016 AVMA convention, I encountered a company offering a unique educational opportunity. Specifically, they had the first ever RACE-approved 2-week veterinary course on wildlife management in South Africa, planned for the end of August. Once I learned of this fantastic opportunity, I could not pass it up. I have just returned from this expedition and must say that it was the best trip ever. I learned so much, and I am excited that Professor Van Hoven has agreed to partner with VetVine to offer an educational series that highlights some of the things that I learned while in South Africa. Dr. Berger and I are here with Professor Wouter Van Hoven, Emeritus Professor at the University of Pretoria and founder of EcoLife Expeditions. I am so excited that Professor Van Hoven has agreed to join us in this space. Professor?
Thank you, Dr. Zinger. It's been a pleasure having you out there in South Africa with the rest of the group, as you can see there. So we are now starting the part 3 of a series on wildlife conservation and care in Southern Africa. And our focus now will be on managing elephants in Africa. Now, as an introduction and to link with the previous one, in the previous section, we dealt with rhinos. And I sketched the whole situation of the intensive poaching of rhino for their horn. Now, there's one very important difference that we must take note of, and that is that the horn of the rhino grows all the time. The ivory of the elephant does not. So you can ranch with the rhino and harvest the horn sustainably. But you cannot do that with elephants. For one, they're not good animals to ranch. Secondly, the only way you can get the ivory is by killing the animal and hacking it off. It's not going to regrow. It's like your teeth, whereas the rhino horn is more like your fingernails. But in Africa, we've had a sad situation that there has been a tremendous onslaught on these animals for one thing, and that is for the ivory. They've been killing them big time. At this point in time, Africa is losing elephants at a rate of 100 per day. This is one of the big ones that used to occur in Kruger National Park, and but this one was not poached. We have very little poaching of elephants in Kruger Park, and I need to show this slide again of the continent of Africa. And if we look at the whole picture, it is so that of all these states, the only countries where elephants are on the increase is really South Africa and Botswana. They're maintaining their numbers to some degree in Namibia and also in Zimbabwe. But in all of Africa, rhinos are being lost at an alarming rate. Many countries that used to have elephants now have nothing left. And it is this greed of the ivory. So in Africa, we basically got two kinds of problems. The one is that they are being annihilated and they're being wiped out in the countries. So the elephant problem is one of rapid decline towards extinction. In South Africa and in Botswana, the problem is just the other way around. They're being protected to such a good extent that the numbers are so much on the increase that they are causing environmental damage. So we've got a problem in South Africa and Botswana of simply too many elephants, so we don't know what to do with them. But here is Garamba National Park in the northeast of the Democratic Republic of Congo. There is no more elephants left there. Maybe it's still a handful, but everything has been poached. And what you find there is dead animals like you see on this slide. Their northern white rhinos have gone locally extinct some years ago already. So the problem is of a big order in these countries. The army has been killing them. This rogue Lord Resistance Army, they sustain themselves from the ivory that they get from the elephants. If we look at Gabon, just in the past 10 years, Gabon has lost 60% of the entire elephant population. And we're into the next years, and that decline is not abating at all. It's just increasing. So in 2014, it is estimated that there was 30,000 elephants killed in Africa, and that is 8% of the total population. And this is what it's all about, ivory. And this is a commodity that I think the world definitely don't need. We can, by 3D printing, by whatever other means, get anything that is a substitute for ivory. We don't really need to use ivory. It's a different story with some of the stuff that they use for medicinal things, which people believe that it cures, but they don't make a medicine of ivory. It's just for trinkets, and used to be for the notes on pianos. Okay, so there's the figures then, and these figures were confirmed during the past CITES meeting in September of 2016, and again, we are losing at least 100 every day. Some of them, like you see in this slide, get caught into snares. This one had a wire snare around its trunk. Fortunately, it could be darted and there's wire removed, but you can imagine the kind of damage and pain an animal like this should suffer due to this snare. And because of all this poaching of elephants, again, like with the rhinos, there's a lot of orphaned young ones that are around. And as we have rhino orphanages, we also have elephant orphanages. And this piece of video material shows how a bunch of small elephants are being cared for.
Come, Zizi. Come, Zizi. Good girl. Come on. Talk. Hold it. Go. Good girl. Come, Zizi. Come, Zizi.
But let's get back to the South Africa situation, and Kruger Park in particular. Now, Kruger Park used to have, and it was maintained, their elephants at about 8,000. But on the last census in 2015, their numbers were seen to be 19,000. Now, this is an overpopulation. For a long period of time, the elephant numbers were maintained at a certain level, and we'll see that in the next slide. The position with elephants were such that where in the 1920s there was just a handful of elephants in the park, and gradually they started increasing and then rapidly increasing. And by 1964 there was close on 8,000 elephants in the park. In fact, they went just over 8,000. And the ecologists at that point in the park and the scientists there studied the influence that elephants had on habitat and vegetation and the quality of the animals. And they came to the conclusion that to have a balanced ecosystem where you are not protecting one species to the detriment of another, one should actually not have the numbers in the park exceed 8,000 elephants. So on that basis, the numbers were maintained at 8,000 elephants for a period of 30 years until 1994. Then there came a change in government, and with the change in government also came an embargo, and the National Park Service was informed to stop with the harvesting process that they used to have and just simply not do any harvesting of elephants anymore. So the result of that was an increase, and today this park sits with an overpopulation of elephants. Well, elephants are ecosystem engineers. It is well known that they can change a woodland into a grassland. They do a lot of damage to trees. Here you can see them taking the bark off trees, and this makes the trees much more vulnerable to fire, but some trees also simply die if they are totally ring barked. Many other species are negatively influenced, and the biodiversity is influenced by an overpopulation of elephants. Certain birds, like vultures, and in this case, the ground hornbill, they make their nests in the trees, and if elephants break the branches and push the tree over, they'll have to build a new nest. Now, they would only do that once. They will not go and build a third nest. Then they'll just quit it. And with that, they stop breeding. And the numbers of these ground hornbill are now on the decline in the Kruger National Park. Right, so there's been different kinds of discussions. Okay, if there's no more harvesting, what should be the way in which one should manage the elephant population? And there's 6 different methods in general that can be used. One is translocation, secondly is vasectomy, chemical castration, immunocontraception, then the culling or harvesting of elephants, and the latter one is the total export of elephants out into other countries. So we'll just briefly have a look at some of these to see whether it is viable. If we look at option 1, which is translocation, well, it is so that at this point there is simply no more place in South Africa where you can translocate elephants to. With translocation, we mean to put elephants in trucks and move them to other parts of the country. Well, during the harvesting years, already many elephants that were not actually harvested in the park were sent to other places like other smaller reserves, and especially in the beginning, they used the small elephants to restock or to start new populations in other smaller reserves. But everybody that wanted elephants now have elephants. The trans-frontier parks is not exactly a success, the one with Mozambique. One, because with the opening up of the fence, elephants didn't voluntarily just go through. Elephants were trucked into Mozambique. That caused problems with local communities. They weren't always happy that they all of a sudden have a bunch of elephants on their doorstep that come and eat their crops. And also the elephants just started going straight back to Kruger Park. What was also found is that they took quite a while before they would settle down. So there's just a few that really did successfully relocate into Mozambique. One should also understand that this is a very expensive exercise, and to just use trucks to truck them around, you're not going to make much of a dent in an overpopulation in excess of 10,000 elephants in the park. So it's got limited success in translocation. And with that goes the fencing. Elephants do not exactly respect fences. They can break them down, but fences are also restricting the movement of other animals that would normally have some migration to better lands. So in the whole, fencing is not exactly a method of promoting biodiversity. There you see an elephant just walking right through a fence. This one is even electrified, but they still managed to get right through it. This picture was taken in the northwestern part of Kruger Park. The problem often with these elephants breaking fences is that Kruger National Park is an endemic area for certain diseases, such as foot and mouth disease. There's also some corridor disease, as well as bovine tuberculosis. Now, with elephants breaking fences, species such as buffalo or impala or kudu that might have anthrax with them, or foot and mouth, will go through into rural areas and infect the cattle. And that becomes a very expensive exercise to eradicate those diseases out of the rural communities' cattle. In addition, just to the western side of the fence of Kruger Park is a mining area. And mining lands and elephants can just walk through, like you see on these slides, get into the mining area and simply make themselves at home. As long as they don't feel threatened, they settle down pretty easy and walk right through the parking lot, and this happens. The second alternative to translocation in managing the population is vasectomy. Now, the question is asked, can elephants be vasectomized? Well, one should understand that vasectomy is a good method. It is a permanent contraceptive technique. It is also a technique that has been used on animals and even in humans, and it's used around the world. The advantage of vasectomy is, of course, that it does not have any hormonal influence seriously on the male. They continue to carry on normal life. They get interested in the females. They in fact mate with the females, but the reproduction function of such mating does not happen. So they still act normally. But in order to do this vasectomy, it's quite a cumbersome task. You need to have a veterinarian with the knowledge of how to use a dart gun. You need the right kind of darts and the right drugs. You need a helicopter in order to be able to immobilize this elephant. And before you can start such a vasectomy, you also need a crane and a truck to lift the elephants up and then turn them around so that they can hang suspended. Now, this slide I just put in because to show that the testicles of most mammals are, of course, on the outside of the body. But in the case of the elephant, the testicles sit right on the inside of the body, right up there close to the spine. And therefore, it's not so easy to just go ahead and sever the vas deferens. This elephant is now in a surgical position. It hangs like that. Bear in mind that elephants are hindgut fermenters. They've got a big colon, and the colon hangs in the bottom end of the belly in this situation. So that makes it easier to access. The following slides were obtained from the national parks on the first efforts to do vasectomies, and it was pretty successful. It can be done. There you see the inside, the testicles. So with a laparoscopic technique, you then look on the monitor to see your way, how to get to the testicles. So you don't need a big slit, just a small slit in which you can enter the tube containing the camera and the light source, and then also a tube with a device to do the actual cutting. You see such a program going on, the cutting device, and then the tube going in with the light. And then the vas deferens is cut in two positions, and the tissue in between is taken out of the body. You cannot just cut the tube at one place because they will join and heal and have transportation of sperm again. Then after the laparoscopic surgery has been done and the vas deferens has been altered, you then have the situation where you can just close up, sew them up, and this elephant is then perfectly fine and can go for a swim or whatever. Then the third option is one that I believe has got quite a bit of potential, and that is the use of the GnRH antagonist. Now, that stands for the gonadotrophin releasing hormone. Now, this has got quite a bit of potential and should be looked at more closely. It suppresses the testosterone by a negative feedback way. And there you see a diagram how this is done, because the antagonist, which looks a lot like the normal GnRH hormone, is produced in the hypothalamus, and that then influences the luteinizing hormone as well as the follicle stimulating hormone to be inhibited in the production of these two, which normally stimulates the production of testosterone. So with the lowering of those two hormones, you're going to get lower testosterone production, lower sperm production, and also less male or aggressive kind of activity of the kind from the kind of side of the elephant. They can get quite aggressive at times, and on some of the game ranches, we have found that where they are aggressive towards people or just moody, they become much easier once they're being treated with the antagonist of gonadotrophin releasing hormone. But there's still lots of work to be done on that. The fourth elephant management alternative is the immunocontraception. Now here the focus comes onto the females, and the same can be said as was said with the vasectomy, and that is, it is only good for small populations of elephants. When you start looking at 15 or 16,000 elephants, or in the case of Kruger where you got in excess of 10,000 elephants, these kind of methodologies of population control is just not a doable thing to do. But if you were on a smaller reserve and you might have a population of 100 or less, especially immunocontraception can be implemented with success. But it's still not exactly known what the behavioral consequences of the immunocontraception is on the elephants, because it's clear that you will have much less production of elephant, but also these females where they normally would look after their young and they would mate, they do nothing of this. These elephants are just going to eat, and it's just bound to have some kind of influence on their behavior. Okay, how does this really in practice work? It's quite simple in the sense that the porcine zona pellucida is used as an agent. So around the egg under normal conditions, you find the zona pellucida, and within the zona pellucida, there are proteins that act as attractors of the sperm, or the sperm protein then. And if you now harvest the proteins of the zona pellucida of pigs and use that as a vaccine, which creates antibodies, and that then binds with the zona pellucida proteins of the elephant, it causes a shield that does not attract the sperm and just exactly does the opposite. So in a very successful way, and although this needs to be updated, or a top-up of it needs to be done every 18 months. There are some efforts by the scientists to try and prolong this so that we have larger intervals between the use of further vaccinations. Okay, then we get to option 5, and that is the intervention of population increases through culling or harvesting. It led to a lot of debate. There was quite a bit of opinions on it. It used to maintain the elephant numbers at a certain level, and it also showed a very good and sustainable use of the elephant meat, and that was to the benefit of staff and surrounding communities. But one can understand that there was objection against the fact to harvest elephants in this way. It was done on a very clinical and scientific basis. There was an annual count during those years of the number of elephants in the park, and based on that, the decision was made what the size should be of the annual harvest in order to maintain their numbers, and it was always attempted to then eliminate isolated groups so you don't take bigger groups, that you split up and eliminate one group and leave the others. That leads to some level of trauma in those that are left behind. But if you have an isolated group and you eliminate the entire group irrespective of sex or age, you do not actually affect the elephants in the neighboring areas or close by. The harvesting of elephants was only done on isolated groups. Here you see some pictures of that. There you see a group of elephants being rounded up, and the harvesting then starts taking place. This harvesting was done by using darts containing scoline, a controversial substance. It is really a synapse blocker, a nerve blocker, and is designed to make the elephant's brain dead within a very short period of time, within 2 to 3 minutes. There are certain scientists that reckon that elephants are still aware, but even after they fell down with a dose of scoline. But I should also add that it was the practice in those years that any elephant that did show any signs of being aware of its environment was a bullet was put through the brain as well. So that was the method of harvest. There was no running around of the elephants in a hysterical way like when you do this with rifles. It was a very orderly and quiet process. The gut material was all removed from the elephants, and this gut material was left behind for the scavengers and the vultures. The carcasses themselves were moved to a central facility in the park where these carcasses were then treated. There you see that facility in the park, and all the meat was cut into small blocks, and at that time the meats were all cooked in a big pressure cooker and also put in cans, which made the distribution of cooked and canned elephant meat so much easier, because many people out there also didn't even have electricity or fridges, so it was a better way to preserve the meat by having it in cans. So the debate did continue, but there was an embargo placed on this practice. And now that there is so much more poaching in Africa, this debate is intensifying. But I believe that one should also bear in mind that there's poor people living on the outskirts and around national parks that also somehow need to feel the benefit of being or living next to a national park. The relocation of elephants was a final option that is, of course, a very ideal one. Now, with relocation, I actually mean to move them out into other parts of Africa where they've become locally extinct. And such a process we've done with great success in Angola. And in conclusion, I can just say a few things about that. Up in Angola, there has been a civil war that lasted for almost 30 years. And during that civil war, wildlife and nature was decimated. There was, in fact, very little wildlife left towards the end of the war in the entire country. And we've been looking with the Angolan military at their flagship national park, which is the Kisama National Park, on the coast just south of Luanda. Now, that park used to teem with buffalo and teem with elephants and predators. But in the 1990s, there was just nothing left. There was no single animal left. And in conjunction with the government of Angola, we started a program that was called Operation Noah's Ark, and that entailed the relocation of wildlife back into that park, and also the protection of them for the next generation. This was initially, the park was studied by myself and also some grad students to exactly know what the ecology and vegetation cycles are like. And after that, it was decided which species should be brought back. And of course, elephants was part of that basket. Here you see some of the elephants being prepared to go. Elephants were caught. Yeah, the ironic thing is that in the southern states, as we said earlier, South Africa and Botswana have large overpopulations of elephants, whereas up there, like in Angola and elsewhere, in some cases have become locally extinct. So what did we do? We took from areas where there's too many to areas where there's nothing. And here you see some of these elephants being moved. They were darted, put into this big recovery truck, where they were then given an antidote and got up, and they were fully alert when they were put into specially prepared containers and then loaded onto a big Russian cargo plane. And they were then transported to Angola. Here you see the container being loaded into the belly of the cargo plane, and that IL-76 is ready to roll. On the other end, the elephants were then released. The whole from capture to release was within 24 hours, and it went very well. All those elephants came out there in Angola in a very good shape, and they started breeding later, and today, now we are looking at some 15 years down the line after we took the first animals. We have not lost a single elephant to poachers, and the elephants are bred very well, so that where we started with just over 30 elephants, we now have more than 100 elephants. So they are breeding well and have settled very good into this lush vegetation. Thank you.